Welcome to 502 Conversations. I'm Brian Kirby. My guest today, I'm very pleased to say, is Banachek. Banachek, thank you very much for being here.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you for asking me.
I can't believe you said that because this is a thrill and an honor for me.
Well,
a mutual honor.
There we go.
I do have a bio on you, and I know a lot of it, but I want to read it because it's pretty interesting.
Sure, yeah.
So just bear with me and try not to
Ask any questions you want. I will try to answer the best way I can.
All right, and I don't mean to embarrass you, but...
And get as personal as you want to. So if I don't want to answer, I'll just simply say, hey, let's not go there. Yeah.
Described as the cream of the crop of entertainers, Banachek is the world's leading mentalist. His talents are so incredible that he is the only mentalist ever to fool scientists into believing he possessed psychic powers, only to later reveal he was fooling them. And by scientists, I mean physicists at universities. He's astounded audiences around the world and has been featured on CNN Live, NBC's Today Show, Inside Edition, ABC's Nightline, the BBC, and numerous network TV specials, as well as in print in the New York Times, USA Today, Scientific American, and countless other publications. Banachek is also a professional skeptic, a fellow of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, and has overseen several JREF challenges. That's James Randi Educational Foundation challenges. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. I mean, that makes me sound really important. I've never heard it all together like that. I hear bits and pieces of it, so yeah.
That's condensed. You've done numbers of interviews, and I will rehash some of the old stuff, but can you explain briefly what mentalism is?
So mentalism, we take our 5 known senses. We're entertainers, basically, but we take our 5 known senses and, well, we know there's more than 5, but still, we always talk about just the 5 senses. 5 known senses to create the illusion of a 6th sense. Basically, we perform and we look like we're psychics, but we're not. We're using magic, psychology, verbal, nonverbal communication, mostly magic, to simulate psychic phenomena. That's what a mentalist is. By very different definition, if somebody calls himself a mentalist, they're saying, I'm not psychic. But I feel like we do need disclaimers because most lay people have no clue what the term mentalist means, so we have to clarify that for them.
And you started out, you kind of worked backward, right? So you started out exposing fraud, and then you went into mentalism. I mean, you noticed that you had some kind of ability or talent. Not a 6th sense, so to speak, but you noticed you had some...
My talent was sort of like a piano player sits down. Well, somebody who doesn't play the piano, they sit down, they try to play the piano, and they just play it, and it's beautiful. Just no lessons, nothing. They instinctively they get it, right? And then there's other people that take lessons, and they just can never get it. So that person has found what they're really good at. I found what I was good at a very young age, and that was being able to solve problems, basically. I write a lot of magic for people like Chris Angel, David Blaine, Penn and Teller, people like that. If they come to me and say, look, I've got this trick I want to do, I don't know how to do it, I can solve that problem for them. I can create a way to make it look like it's magic. So I'm really good at that, and I found that out at a very young age. When I started out, I didn't know that there was a category of magic called mentalism. I had no clue. I just know that there were people that were using tricks to con other people. And as a result, I was able to come up with methods that were even better than theirs. In fact, some of those people like Uri Geller and people like that use my methods now because they were better than the methods they were using to con people back in the day.
So wait a minute, are you one of these people that, everybody watches an awesome guitar player and go, oh, that looks easy, I could do that. Right. And it looks easy because they've practiced for 20 years and they know what the hell they're doing. Were you actually one of these people that said, I can see what that guy's doing, and do it?
Right away, when I saw Geller, I knew exactly what he was doing. In fact, I hadn't seen Geller in the early days. I had heard that you saw the metal bending.
Why don't you take a second and explain this whole Uri Geller thing, just in case.
Yeah, so back in the 70s and the 80s, there was a gentleman by the name of Uri Geller, and he had been studied at Stanford Research Institute, and he convinced them that he could actually bend metal with his mind. Most people know of the Matrix, where they say there is no spoon. Well, that's a reference to Uri Geller, really, where Geller is actually bending metal, because Geller was the first one to bend spoons and forks and things like that. So it's sort of a reference to that in a way. And Geller had convinced the world that he could do this psychically. I read a book by James the Amazing Randi that stated, and it was the very first thing I'd ever seen like that Geller was a magician posing as a psychic. And I said, if he can do it, I can do it. Now, again, I'd never seen Geller, only heard about Uri Geller. So I had heard you actually see the metal bend. So I created all my methods in such a way that people could actually see the metal bending. And then when I saw Uri Geller, you didn't see that. You might see it with a key or something smaller than that, but usually when it came to a spoon or something like that, he just covered it with his hands, took his hands away, and it would be bent. So that's why Geller and other people are using my methods now.
So that's who he is, and then you were able to just develop this on your own.
I just developed. I came up, and when I was young, I didn't know any magicians. Like I said, I didn't even know there was a subcategory of magic called mentalism. So everything I created as a result of what I thought things should be or things should look like. I basically try to duplicate psychics. Because when you see me perform, I'm usually quite different than other mentalists, especially in the early days. There's a lot of people that follow my character now, and they've adapted it to themselves. But back in the early days, it was more what I would call mental magic. People couldn't explain it, so they thought it might be psychic, but now if we look at it now, it looks like a trick. Whereas I want to look like I'm truly psychic when I'm performing. I want it to appear that like I have no props, that I'm just simply reading minds.
Before we go too far into that, because I have a lot of questions, but it's a conversation, so I usually ask two when we just start talking. I did see your show the other day. It's the second time I've seen you. And I want to talk about the performance aspect of it before the mentalism and the tricking and all that. So I'm a musician by training. You don't need to know the details, but I am a musician. And I noticed before the show, you were backstage, kind of like musicians do. You were, if you don't mind if I'm talking about this, if this gets too personal.
This is fine, yeah.
So you were pacing.
Yep.
It looked like you were thinking to yourself. I'm sorry, I kept an eye on you. It looked like you were not talking to yourself, but kind of giving yourself a little pep talk or whatnot, maybe going through the show in your head while you're waiting, those awful few minutes while you're waiting to go on stage, at least for musicians, where they get the most nervous, even if they've done the bit a lot.
Here's the interesting thing, right? I mean, it might be nervous pacing, I don't know, but I don't feel nervous. I've never felt nervous performing, except for when I perform for other magicians. That's the only time I've ever felt that way, because I know they're going to be very critical. They're going to be watching, and it's one of those things of, oh, is tonight going to be the night when something's going to go bad, and they're going to know, and that's all they're ever going to talk about. So I do have those moments in my head when it comes to magicians, and there are things that I do differently for magicians and effects that I perform only for magicians, because they're sort of this inside thing. Whereas for lay people, I never get nervous. In fact, it's a very funny thing. I think part of my pacing is I'm also memorizing a lot of things in my head, and I'm going through a lot of things in my head right before the show, because there's a huge volume of information that I have to memorize for my type of performance. And I'm also dyslexic, so I second guess myself constantly with names, with numbers and things like that. So I'm really trying to make sure that I get those things right, because the moment I hit that stage, I can't think about that stuff anymore. It's got to just come out automatically at the right moment in the performance itself. I have this very weird thing, which I don't know if other performers, I've not heard of other performers that have it, but right before a show, I can literally lay down and take a nap. And I have done it, where I get sort of this wave of tiredness, and I can just lay down and take it out. And the moment I get on stage, I'm wide awake, and then for hours after the show, I can't wind down.
I didn't mean to actually say that you were nervous or imply that you were nervous.
Yeah.
But many musicians, they do. You can see them walking around, waiting for that. And now, blah, 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 and then the performance starts at the walk to the stage and the leap up on the, or the fast-paced walk up onto the stage. The performance aspect of it, besides the tricks and the mentalism, there's a performance part of it to it, right? Where, or maybe I'm wrong, and what I mean by performance, separate from the stories, how you bring the audience in, your personality.
Right.
You're not like that all the time. I mean, I imagine you're a super nice guy and all, but does my question make any sense?
You mean on stage?
It's actually, the whole thing is a performance.
Yeah, even the pre-stuff in a way,
right,
really,
exactly.
because you're getting yourself psyched up, you're getting yourself ready to go on stage. There is that moment of the waiting. The performance doesn't start the moment you hit the stage. It starts before that, in your head. At least in my head, it starts before I actually get on stage. I'm not purposely performing for people, and it's sort of a natural thing for me when I get on stage. It becomes that's sort of who I am when I'm on stage. When I was a kid, and I guess we'll go back to this because it always comes to this to put things in perspective. I was abandoned when I was 9 years old with 2 brothers a year and 3 years old. Raised by myself till I was 15 in South Africa. Left there to go find my biological father in Australia. Moved to the U.S. with him. High school, I moved out. I had 3 jobs. My one sister came and lived with me just for a little bit. So I was very socially inept. And I always felt like I never had a home because I'd moved from England, South Africa, Australia, everywhere, different. I lived in Colorado, I lived in Pennsylvania. So it was just, I was always moving. Never really felt like I had a home. And it wasn't until I started performing in high school and started doing things in high school, and it didn't matter if it was the cafeteria floor, an actual stage, or wherever it is, I felt like that was my home. And I still feel like that today, that when I'm on stage, that's my home. And I can't be at my best in my own home unless I have an incredible audience that's giving me their time and their attention. That's where I feel most comfortable. So when I hit that stage, that is really me in a way. It's not me putting on a full performance. It's a very different me, but it's still me. And I can open up. I have control right there. And usually we think when we're in our own home, we have full control, right? It's our home, we have control. And that's where I feel most in control, is when I'm on stage.
So the stage is your home?
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
And like I said, it doesn't have to be a big stage with thousands of people. It could be this room. And if I was doing some stuff for people, this moment, this time, I would feel most comfortable. It's my home because I'm performing.
Well, let me ask you a question about that then. I don't know, do you find we're at PsyCon, Committee for Skeptical Inquirer Conference, and you performed in 2016, I saw it, and I saw you last night.
Very different shows.
Yes, actually you had...
Same kind of effects, but very different shows. This one's sort of autobiographical.
Yeah, right.
It's my history, it's my life. It's also the history of telepathy. I come out really hard in the beginning, as if I'm genuine. I actually talk to dead relatives, which I think is despicable, but I do it for a purpose. I do it because I want the people to have the same emotions they would have if they went to a genuine psychic. And I've discussed that with my manager, Tyus. It's a very icky kind of thing. And I have to be very careful how I present that, because I don't want to change a person's thoughts or emotions about a departed one. That's not what it's for. So the only thing I'm going to do is give them information as they remember it and how they remember it. So I'm not changing that memory in any form. And I will have people crying, but I want that, even though I feel dirty doing that, because if I go up to somebody and I try to explain how a psychic works, all right, and I do something, just do something for them, they're going to go, yeah, but that's a trick. I once went to the psychic, and what they're doing is they're going off the emotions they felt with that psychic. So I need to get into their minds and into their hearts the same way that a psychic would, so that when I come out later on and I say, hey, this stuff isn't real, they understand that what they experience with those psychics isn't real, not just what they experience with me isn't real. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense to me. I was going to say, I shouldn't say perfect sense, but it does make sense to me, that part of the show. You got those people, though.
Right.
Those people...
Yeah, and even some other people walked up and said it was emotional for them during that moment. So it's, yeah.
It's a skeptic crowd, though.
Right.
So is that a more difficult show? And apparently not, because you suck these people in, myself included.
My manager, Tyus, saw me a couple of years ago for the first time working for a skeptics group. And he sort of was astonished because he thought it was going to be the most difficult crowd for me to work. And I think they're very appreciative of the work that I've done and the work that I do as well. So for me, they may be a little bit of an easier group on one level, but on another level, it's very difficult. There are moments where, I'll give you an example, okay? And it's sort of letting you a little bit inside something.
Me and no one else.
Yeah, but no one else. So yeah, you guys just close your eyes, close your ears, don't listen. So how much can I say on this without giving something away? All right, so in this particular show, I'm bending silverware. And there's a specific order that I want to do the bends in. I can do them in any order, but from a theatrical standpoint, I want the bends to culminate from where it's a small bend to a bigger bend, to a difficult bend, to something that's much more visible where something's breaking, right? So the forks are all in sort of a stand. So I can always say stop any time, and I can kind of get past the one fork that I want to save for the big thing in the end, right? I've never, ever had anybody choose that first fork if I do that, because I want to save that fork for the break at the end.
They've never chosen the last fork first. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, no, never chosen the
finale
first fork first.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
All right? I can get by that one fork. It's the only fork I want to get by because I want to save it for later on for a big finale. Here, of course, I got by it, and the guy waited till I was at the end. I said, before I get to the end, he said, keep going. And he had me come all the way back to it. So I had to say, all right, so this fork right here, you know, this will be the climax. You know, keep your eye on that. We will get back to that later. It's the only time I've ever had to do that. But I had to do it because it was a skeptical group. So that's the way they think. Sometimes they make things more difficult. Sometimes they'll change. I'll do a thing with a book test where I'll riffle through the pages of a book. I just go through them and say stop anytime. And then I'll give somebody a chance. I'll say, do you want me to stay here or do you want me to go to another page? Most people go 2-3 pages. They want to change or they stay right there. A skeptical group will say, go back 15 pages. It's like, 1, 2. And it just takes forever. I don't care where they go. It's just from a timing perspective, sometimes with skeptics, it becomes more difficult. It will throw me off the timing. But I've been doing this so long that I have ways. I get around it anyway, so yeah.
Well, I think, also we're interested in how you can fool us, because I'm sure people think, oh, I'm smart, and
sure.
This isn't going to. So that's a great aspect of the show. I'll come back to that in a minute. You do have a lot of stories about tricksters and hucksters and frauds and stuff, but have you ever had a conversation with someone that truly thought they knew what was going on, that they were psychic, and they I think I spoke to Ray Hyman a couple of years ago, and he said that he kind of gauged that 95% of these psychics and mediums thought they were real.
Yeah, they do.
And I thought, they all knew they were conning people.
No, not at all. In fact, I can honestly say that I think, other than one, I think that every single person that I ever tested for the $1 Million Challenge, we had $1 million for anybody who could do anything psychic.
Go ahead and explain that for people.
Yeah, so the James Randi Educational Foundation has $1 million for anybody that can do anything psychic and demonstrate that ability on a proper scientific controls, right? So we have the preliminary challenge, and then you have the formal challenge. You take the stats of both of those, and it comes to 1 in a million. So it's 1 in a million, but you get the $1 million. If you pass the preliminary challenge, you move on to the formal challenge. And the reason I actually broke that up in the end when I took over, because I was like, well, what if there's something in the protocol that we didn't quite catch? It's only fair to the psychic and fair to us that we have the ability to fix that little loophole, that one thing that we didn't see before. Because if the psychic gets the $1 million and there's that loophole, people are going to still say, well, no, that psychic cheated because of that. So that's not fair to them either. And it's also not fair to us, because we need to make sure we have proper protocol. And anyway, bottom line is we had $1 million for any psychic that could do anything under proper scientific conditions. Nobody ever took the money. Nobody even passed the preliminary part of the challenge.
Nobody got through the preliminary.
Nobody got through the preliminary. So, and we did this at TAM, the Amazing Meeting, which was Randy's big conference every year. And I always made sure that there was at least one psychic that we could get on stage. And it wasn't easy. And I always made sure I treated them with a lot of respect, because they were coming here and they were going to be in front of a group of skeptics. They knew that they were. And I just thought, let me treat these people with the respect that they deserve. And I know that every single one of them truly believed in their abilities.
They did.
Here's the weird thing about that, though, is every time, because they were so nice, most of them, I truly felt that this is going to be the one that if they fail, and I say if because I always walked in being open-minded. I put all my skepticism aside, other than what we needed for protocol. I gave them the best chance possible. I wasn't negative about any of it, and like I said, I wanted to treat them with respect. I really wanted them to succeed, if they had an ability.
That would be something.
Exactly. I wanted them, and I put myself in that mindset. But every single one of them had an excuse afterwards of why they failed. It didn't matter that when they went into the experiment, part of the questions that we would ask is this in your realm? We put the protocol on, and we would say, is this in the realm of what you can do? Yes. How well do you think you do? Oh, I'll do 100%. I'll do 90%. Whatever it is, Then we always they all said that up front. But later, when they failed, every one of them had an excuse. When I did Nightline, we asked.
Let me just back up before you go too far. So there is a protocol. You see it. They see it. It's right. A two-party agreement.
It's a two-party agreement.
They agree all the way down through to the bottom. This
was always the hardest part with many of people that applied, right? Is they don't understand what science is. So the moment you start putting protocol on it, that becomes the issue. But in the cases where we did test people, it was something we worked on together for the protocol. We said, does this work for you? Why doesn't it work for you? How can we fix this?
Yeah, right.
So we were extremely accommodating.
You need control.
So long as the control was there.
Controls, I should say,
right.
not controls.
Exactly, yeah.
And they all agree, go on, I'm sorry.
No, they all agreed to it. When we did Nightline, we tested 5 psychics. Well, you only saw 5 of them, but there were a few others as well. But every single one of them agreed that this was in their realm of ability. Every single one, because we had set tests. We didn't work on the tests with them there. Because coming up with protocol takes months and months and months of doing that. And we just didn't have that for the Nightline thing. So we had very set tests that we had, and we said, look, we're going to do this test. This is how it's going to work. This is in, what you can, in the realm of what you can do. How comfortable do you feel you're going to be doing? We didn't want somebody that was going to think that it was a game show. And we made an offer to every single one of those people as well. We said, look, if you cannot, if this protocol is not in the realm of what you would normally do or you could do, then we're happy at some future date to work with you and come up with a protocol that works for you, but it won't be for Nightline. So I'm guessing they either all wanted to be on TV or whatever it is, but they all agreed to it. And they all failed. One of them was what we call in the magic business, basically a living and dead test. It's funny because up on the wall right here we have Elvis Presley. And Elvis Presley was one of the pictures because the idea was we would have 12 envelopes. And in all of them were people that were living, and there was a picture of a dead person in one of them that was famous, and in this one particular case, it was Elvis Presley. Another one was Marilyn Monroe. And I would call and I'd make sure every single one of those people were alive right before we went on.
Really?
Just so they didn't hit by a bus or something. Because, if they chose that and the person's dead, then, they succeeded, right?
Gosh.
So I had to make sure that these people were still alive and make sure they were alive after, just in case. So Elvis Presley was one. So the envelopes get mixed up and they're laid out in a row and they have to find the dead person. The one lady, she didn't get it. And she said, I think I know why I didn't get it. Elvis Presley, he was larger than life. And he wants the people to think he's still alive. That's why I failed. That was her excuse.
That is incredible rationalization.
It is, right? Another one was one envelope off. And so they said, well, that's kind of a hit. It's one envelope off. And I go, wait a minute. So you're saying if you get the envelope next to it, that's a hit? I said, which means you could also get the envelope on the other side of it as well and get that envelope. So now you got odds of like the 3 out of the 12 that could be correct that you're going to call a hit. So they always had reasons and excuses for stuff.
I think I saw, did that woman also give an interview where she said, I got it right, but they wouldn't give it to me?
Maybe a lot of them have said that, and it's not true. But there's been quite a few of them that have said that. There's some that said we've cheated them. In fact, one of the very first people we tested, they could find a playing card amongst others that was sealed inside of envelopes with a pendulum, and they failed. And then another magician who wants people to think that he's a genuine psychic in a way, convinced her that I had cheated her with sleight of hand because I'm a magician.
Let me ask a question about this, which is a totally side thing. How did Nightline get involved? Did they hear about JREF?
As far as I know, they had heard about the JREF.
And they thought this would be a good show?
Which it was. It would be great to test psychics, yeah. I'm pretty sure. I wasn't in the original process of how they got a hold of us and so forth. I was just like, hey, are you willing to do this? Yeah, I'm happy to do it. I really didn't think we were going to get a single psychic. I didn't think anybody was going to come out and be tested on live TV like that. But they plastered all the bookstores and everywhere else, and yeah, we got quite a few people coming.
It's interesting because I've seen a few of those shows that you've done, and they cut the show together, right? Because they can't possibly show all of it. Right. So it's cut together, so if it's a 15-minute segment, that's a long time.
Sure.
But on those news magazine shows, they do have that time. They will do the whole bit, and they will fade back to the hosts of the news magazine show, and they're standing like, wow, no, I don't know. They still believe though. You've gone through this whole thing, and I've seen the host go, gosh, I think there's something. I know he didn't get these 10 people, but
it happened on this show where one of the.
But you're not there, right?
Right. No. But there was one of the anchors that was totally convinced by James von Prague because James gave him information that he said was not on social media. And it had to do with his wedding and things. And I was able to find the information on social media and send it to him later, but it already aired at that point. So it's, I think these people, they kind of want to believe. And it is this thing of...
want to believe. You've hit a good point right there.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of sexy for them to leave it out in that open, right? I mean, we had a show called Magic or Miracle back in the day. It's one of the very first shows I did with the amazing Randy. It was also the show where we came out and exposed that we were fakes and frauds, fooling scientists back for Project Alpha. And... that show was originally supposed to be a very skeptical bent show, and then Geller got on board. And they decided they wanted to leave it open-ended, magic or miracle, which is it? Because that would lead them to have future shows. Whereas if you said, no, this stuff isn't real, they didn't feel that would be good. And we used to get that a lot. It was really hard. It's why it's hard to pitch a skeptical show to networks and so forth, because it's like they see it as I was always saying, you're wrong, we're right, and it's negative, it's banging, it's pushing, it's going against people's beliefs, and they don't find that as sexy. We're starting to get to that point now where people want information, and they want to know how a lot of these things may or may not be done. So that it's coming back around the other way, where that controversy is a good thing. I think so. I'm starting to see more skeptical slants on things, a little bit more science-based, a little bit more. We had mind games, and that was an interesting thing, but that was a hard concept to sell. I went to a couple of networks before mind games came out for National Geographic, and I had a show that was very close to that. And one of the networks that I went to happened to be that network that took it, changed it a little bit, and put it out a few years later. But in the original pitch, it wasn't something they were looking at for. They wanted to leave things open. And I get that a lot, where they say, well, can you just act a little bit like you're really psychic and just kind of like allude to that? I'm like, no, that's not what I do.
You've been behind the scenes with some of these shows, though, right?
Right.
Some of these psychic shows or ghost hunters or what like that?
No, I've had friends that are behind the scenes on the ghost hunter shows, and I've been called by them to say, there was one ghost hunter show that called me up and said, would you come in and mess a little bit with the ghost hunters and just make one little thing happen every single episode? And I was like, no, I can't do that. But I do have a friend that has done that. So, and it just takes one little thing, like a hairbrush to move or something like that. Yeah. It doesn't take a lot, just a small thing for the ghost hunters. That's all they need.
It's almost as real as reality TV.
Yeah.
So you're telling me right now that these things that they stage as documentaries.
Most of it's staged, and I'm pretty sure most of the stuff on the Ghost Hunter shows, almost all of it is staged. And
I guess we should say in your humble opinion, and in my opinion,
in my humble opinion, and also my knowledge of some of the people that work behind the scenes in a lot of these, yes.
It's a show.
There's a lot of stuff that's staged. It's a show, yeah.
Let's go back to the Nightline thing just for a second. So when they pan back in the anchor, these are famous people that, for some reason, if you see a celebrity on TV, you think you know them. That's why they advertise and things like that. Have you ever run into one of these people in any kind of situation and said, look, you're peddling this crap. There's 3 million people that watch your show from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. in the morning. And when we panned back and said it wasn't real, and you're like, oh, I know they didn't work here, but my psychic knows what's going on. I mean,
yeah, I don't get that as much. And I think the reason I don't get that kind of an attitude from them, that I don't have to come back and say that, is because I'm not your typical skeptic that comes in and just talks about those things. I'm the skeptic that comes in and performs those same kind of things. So they take me a little bit more serious in that way, because they're like, well, how did he do? When I did Joe Rogan, what was it, Quest, I think it was. Joe Rogan Questions Everything, so kind of thing. Joe was going around, he was starting to believe in this stuff. And then I performed and did a little mini show, and there was a lot more stuff that I had done for him there. On that TV show, afterwards, I saw him at the Mandalay Bay. I was just sitting there, and he walked up. He said, Banachek. I said, yeah. He said, look, I just want to thank you. He said, you changed mine and Duncan's life. You changed the way we thought about those things. We were starting to think some of that stuff was real until we saw you, and you were more real than any of the psychics we had seen. So we had to start questioning what we actually believed in. And he mentioned me multiple times on his podcast, long before I was on the podcast, as a result of that experience with me. And I think a lot of people have that same experience with me when I perform on their shows. It's a different feeling than if I was just to go on there and say, hey, this stuff isn't real and this is why it isn't real. If I can show you, if I can duplicate, if I can give you that same experience that you're getting from those psychics, and maybe even a better one than you're getting from those psychics, you're walking away with that, like we talked about in the beginning, you're walking away with an emotional convincing of this stuff may not be real, as opposed to necessarily just a logical one, where you go, okay, logically it might not be real, but maybe there's something I don't understand. Yeah, when I come in and I do it, you go, yeah, there's definitely something I don't understand, because I don't understand how he does that, so maybe, just maybe, I don't understand how these other things are done as well.
I have two questions about that. You used the word duplicate.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a psychic say, "Oh, I know Banachek will say that he's doing a trick, but it's not the way I do it"? And
Oh, of course.
I'm not a
no,
trick.
of course they're going to say that. Yeah, they're going to say that.
Nobody's going to say, "Oh, Banachek got me."
They're going to say, no, they're never going to say, well, Banachek does it with a trick. I do it with a trick too. No, they're never going to say that.
The opposite of that. Have you ever walked off and somebody said, "You're a psychic"?
Oh, yeah, I get that.
You do get that.
I get that. Look,
I know Ray Hyman said he got it, and James Randi says he's got it. And
yeah, with mentalists, when I started doing mentalism back in the 70s, mid-70s, there really were no mentalists that were going around saying that, this is not real. A lot of them wanted people to believe they were real because it was sexy to do that, number one. Number two, maybe they weren't great performers, so they needed people to sort of believe in their ability to be able to get away with what they were doing, kind of like when you go see a hypnotist, you're pre-hypnotized. In fact, the first time I saw Uri Geller, it was for a room full of believers, and there Geller's sitting, and he does a thing where he says, okay, go up on the, he's holding a board right here, and there's a big blackboard behind him. He holds the board right here like this. He says, okay, go to the board. I'm going to hold this up so I can't see. And I want you to write a number on the board. And he goes like this, and he's holding the board down like that. And I could just see him moving the board and kind of turning his head and looking. It was very obvious to me what he was doing. But because all those people in the audience were believers, they didn't see it. And it's like I'm going, and there were multiple things that he did that I could see that was very blatant, not just because I'm a magician. It was just very blatant. If you were skeptical on any level whatsoever, you would have been able to question that and say, I think he might have done this. But none of those people did because they believed in what he was doing. So when I started out with mentalism, nobody was really going around saying that they were fake or that they were a fraud, and that this stuff isn't real and that I'm duplicating this type of phenomena. So when I came out, there was one guy, a professor, who had done a lecture. His name was Ned Rutledge, and he coined the term, taking my 5 known senses to create the illusion of a 6. And it was for a one-off that he did. And Randy showed me this thing and said, this will fit you perfectly, and it does. So I started using that and saying, I take my 5 known senses to create the illusion of a 6th sense. So when I really started promoting that and pushing that, a lot of mentalists gave me pushback. They said, there's no place for a fake mind reader. And I go, well, we are fake mind readers. That's what we do, right? And they got very upset with me. And then I took College Entertainer of the Year 2 years in a row. I took Novelty Entertainer of the Year in the college market the next year. And they were saying I was the exception. So if I'm the exception...
Well, you're the exception. You're the fake one?
No, I'm the exception that can actually say that I'm not real.
Okay.
And it was part of, they were saying, because of Project Alpha and that. But I'm saying, I said to them, I said, if I can be the exception, then other people can be the exception. That can actually be the norm, which it sort of has become the norm of presenting mentalism now. They had another thing that they say, and they still say this. They say, if you're doing like a play, Macbeth, you don't stop in the middle and go, this is just a play, I'm really not Macbeth. And I go, well, of course you don't, because it's context, right? It's people know when they come to a play that it's a play. However, if I'm a mind reader on stage and you've never seen a mind reader before, I become the context of what this is. Whatever I say it is, because you can't explain it, is what you will walk away with it believing if you have no knowledge of this whatsoever. So it's all about context. In the same aspect of you get a neurosurgeon, comes on that same stage, he starts talking about the human mind and breaking it all down. Very quickly you go, okay, this guy's a real surgeon. I get it, all right? He's a real doctor. Just because he's standing on that stage doesn't mean he's an actor. He's an actual doctor. I get it. And it's all about context. So for me, I know there are going to people come to my show, they're not going to believe no matter what I say, they're not going to believe. They're going to be skeptics no matter what I say. I know there's a portion of people that have come, they're going to believe no matter what I say, they're going to believe this stuff is real. But there's a large portion of people who've never seen a mentalist perform before. Like somewhere in that middle, there's this large portion of people. I become the authoritative figure on whatever this is. If I say that it's NLP, they're going to walk away that it's NLP. If I say that it's magic, neuro-linguistic programming, which Darren Brown, which is a European mentalist, well known over there, in the very early stages told everybody that what he was doing was NLP.
Neuro-linguistic programming.
And everybody started thinking that what he was doing was NLP. which to me, a lie is a lie is a lie. That's just as bad as saying that you're a psychic, I think, when you start going in those directions. I think you have to definitely add that there's magic with this, you know, that you may be using, I use a lot of psychology in my shows, but the psychology is there just to enhance the performance. There's very few effects, I do have a few, that rely purely on psychology. Very few, because that's iffy. I need to succeed, right? Psychology is not always going to work for me. But if I've got 4 glasses and there's a certain sequence that I want you to choose glasses, and there may be something I can say or do to get you to choose the 4th glass first, then I will use that. But it's not always going to work. But sometimes it's just a word or something along those lines. So I find it really important for me to remind the audience that, hey, I'm not a psychic, I'm an entertainer. Because my job is to entertain. It's not to change people's belief systems. That's not what I'm trying to do at all. Unless I'm actually, and even when I give my, the show that I did here, even though it's a skeptical show, even though I'm talking about how I exposed fakes and frauds, my job, I don't think there, and I even said at the very end, it's not to change your belief system. It's just to remind you that for every belief you have, there is somebody out there willing to take advantage of that belief. They're willing to take advantage of you because you believe in something. And I think it's okay for people to believe things so long as you're not hurting anybody else, and so long as you're not, you know, and what I mean by that even, it's not necessarily on a physical level or a mental level, but if you're moving science backwards because of what you're doing and what you believe, that's not a good thing either, right?
Let's go on to Project Alpha. I know you've talked about it, but I want to talk about it a little bit. And you can set it up briefly if you want to.
Sure.
Please watch An Honest Liar. It's great in there. You can find, and also this Nightline video that you talked about. Google Nightline, Banachek. You'll get the information. So you mentioned Project Alpha earlier in the conversation. Can you set it up for me, because I have a few questions?
Yeah. So in the 1970s, and even prior to that, scientists lamented there was no evidence of ESP under proper scientific control because of lack of funding. Now, it was sort of my contention, the amazing Randy's contention, Mike Edwards, which I'll get to who Mike is in just a second. It was our contention that it had nothing to do with the lack of funding. It had to do with scientists going in with a pro-biased opinion. In other words, scientists were going in studying this phenomena, already believing in it, not using science to find out whether it was real or not. They were basically going in and saying, I believe this is real, I want to document it, and do it under sort of this scientific label so that everybody else will see it and believe it as well.
Can you define scientists for me? So who are you working with? You working with physicists?
When I say scientists, we're
talking
talking about parapsychologists really back in the day. But these were physicists.
PhDs.
They were PhDs, yeah. I mean,
they knew how Newtonian mechanics and classical
mechanics. These were
mechanics.
true scientists, you know. They weren't just somebody that says they're a science, so I'm using science or something like that. These were people who had had a PhD in science in some level, some way, whatever it may be. So these were people that other people
very, very smart people
respected. These were people that could write a document and get it published. So yeah, it's
and get funding for
in
this.
some sort of scientific journal or something like that. Yeah, and they could get funding. So McDonnell Douglas of McDonnell Aircraft gave $500,000 to Washington University to study psychic phenomena. He said, you can study whatever you want. A physicist there by the name of Peter Phillips at Washington University in St. Louis, a prestigious university here in the United States, decided he wanted to study PKMB, which is an acronym for psychokinetic metal bending. Now, up until that point, I had been bending metal and doing things and pretending I was a psychic, because I had written Randy years before that and said, if you ever need a kid to try to convince scientists this stuff is real, I'd be happy to do so. Randy said, well, do me a favor, just pretend like you're a psychic. I know it's going to be difficult for you and it's against what you really want to present, but do that for right now. So if they ever do any research on you, it'll come back that, hey, you are a psychic and, you know, you're not a magician. So I did that for a couple of years, and then 1979 this came along. I saw the Associated Press article they put out. I wrote them a letter. I said, you know, I can bend metal with my mind. And they accepted me. They brought me out. They wanted to study me.
How many applicants do you know?
There were over 300 applicants, and out of all the applicants, 2, myself and Mike Edwards, another young kid who was also a magician, unbeknownst to them. And had they done any background check on him, they would have found out.
So they
would have found out
background
Mike was a magician, because he did, you know, he was in a straight. Well, kids don't lie, right? That's kind of what that was the thing back then. They do lie.
Oh, they
I mean,
lie
kids lie all the time, like crazy. They learn to lie and they try to get away with it as much as they can.
It's like one of the first things they know how to do.
Exactly right. But that was the thinking back then. And so myself.
So they didn't have kids apparently, but okay.
No. So Mike and I, we were accepted and studied, and we were studied for over 4 years, 180 hours total. We bent metal, we did all kinds of other types of experiments. We would shorten the life of a fuse. They would put a fuse in a fuse box, and they would say, okay, it goes out in 20, I don't remember what the number was, but 25 seconds is when we put a current through it, approximately 25 seconds, it breaks.
And you're looking at it.
Can you make it like go in 5 seconds? So I'd sit there and I'd concentrate, and sure enough, I would get it in 5, 10 seconds. I was consistently figuring out ways to do these things, and they would put a photograph in an envelope that was stapled shut, put me in a room, have me look at a slideshow. They'd leave the room, and I would be able to sit in there as long as I want, look at the slides, and then I would come out, give them the stapled envelope, and say, I think it's picture number 4, and they'd open it up, and it would be picture number 4. They had a lucite block where they cut a groove in it and put a piece of metal in it, so you can't actually touch it. You can touch the top of the piece of metal, but you can't really get it without plucking it and taking it out. And I was able to get those to bend and bend up, wire rods to bend. We had a whole host of different things that they would come up. There was one where they had a bell jar with a needle underneath it and a little rotor on top of it, and they would cover it with a bell jar, and there'd be a wooden base on the bottom that would fit into. And they said, can you get it moved to the left? And I concentrated, made it move to the left. Can you make it to the right to make sure there's no air currents? It would move to the right, and it was all covered in anti-static to make sure we weren't using static electricity or anything like that. So there was all these different experiments. And
they're documenting as you go what you're doing.
Yeah.
And they are, it's totally controlled as far as they're concerned.
As far as they're concerned, this is
a
controlled environment. Yes.
Foolproof.
Yeah, and you have to keep in mind, it wasn't like we didn't have things happen all the time. There'd be days we would sit there for hours and hours concentrating on a piece of metal, and nothing would happen.
And they're studying you this whole time?
They're studying us the whole time. Now, here's the thing, right? So we had these hypotheses. One, it was about the lack of funding. You know, it was the pro-biased opinion that was getting in the way. And the other one, we thought, because they had PhDs, they would think they were too smart to be fooled. So therefore, they wouldn't accept the help of somebody outside, a magician who could detect the trickery, that might not have a PhD. So all during this time, the amazing Randy is consistently saying to them, he's writing letters. They don't know we're working with him. And he's writing letters saying, look, if you ever do this experiment, it'll be exactly the experiment that we just did. And somehow they never caught on.
They never picked that up?
Never picked up that he always knew what we were doing. And they say, you might want to put this control and that control. And the controls he was telling them would have stopped us from doing what we were doing. But they wouldn't listen to him. He offered to come out multiple times on his own expense, on his own dime. They never did. And we had very fast rules. If they ever asked us if we were working with the amazing Randy, we had to say yes. If they ever asked us if we were magicians and using tricks, we had to say yes. So we had all these different rules. They never asked us that. There was one time, and it was towards the end, when Randy leaked out 2 rumors. One rumor was the truth, that Mike and I were working with Randy to fool the scientists, and the other one is that the scientists themselves were working with Randy to fool the rest of the scientific community. So these were put out at this big conference. And so the next time we came back, they said, hey, we heard these rumors. And they said, well, one is that you guys are working with the amazing Randy to try to fool us. And Mike and I going, uh-oh, we're going to have to come clean. Because they're not asking us, but they're telling us at this point. And then they start laughing. And we even heard a funnier rumor than that, is that we, the scientists themselves, were working with the amazing Randy. Isn't that ridiculous? They were laughing about those rumors. They never asked us. Randy sent them 11 caveats at the very beginning. He said, look, I'll give you an example. He said, don't let the subjects work together. You know, work with one subject at a time, meaning either work with Mike or work with me or whoever else they're working with one at a time, because they can misdirect you. Don't let them work with more than one object at a time. Make sure that everything's marked on a macro and micro level. And they showed us this list of these caveats.
They showed you the list?
They showed us the list that Randy had sent. And they had a good laugh. They said, this would all make you so uncomfortable. There's no way you would be able to do anything. They felt like for our psychic abilities to happen, we had to be comfortable within the environment itself.
So they released their own controls?
Yeah. I mean, they would mark things not on a macro and micro level, which would have been so easy to do, which we wouldn't have known if it was on a micro level, if they did it correctly. But they did things like they would take a tag and put it on a spoon, and then they would call that number 1. And then they would put the spoon on a table, and then they would measure it at both ends and then in the center. So they knew exactly what the measurements were of it being off the table at different areas. And each one of them was slightly different, so that would be by the millimeter. Now, when we first went in, we had absolutely no clue if they were going to be using one-way mirrors or what we didn't know what they were doing. So we were very, very cautious in the very beginning, Mike and I, when we first got there. And I just said, hey, can I take this tag off? It's getting in the way. Yep. So I took the tag off, put it on the table, concentrated on it, put it down, nothing happens. I don't put the tag on. I pick up a different one that I know is visibly different. And I take that one, I say, can I take this tag off? Yep, put it down, concentrate on it. And then I put the tags on, but I put them on the opposite spoons. And then
Right in front of them.
Right in front of them. And because there's a lot of time going on between this. So they don't know which tag belongs to which spoon. And then maybe 2 hours later, I pick one of those up again, I leave the tag on, I concentrate on it. So I think something might have happened. Could you measure that one? They would measure it, and of course, the measurements have now changed because I've switched tags on the spoons. So we did a lot of those kind of things.
Well, now that you mentioned, this is getting to where I wanted to go. So you explained the whole setup here of how they were testing you, and if you read Project Alpha and then the explanations of some of it, it's like a teenage romp and opportunism in a way.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the very first thing
That's what it should be renamed.
Very first thing I did when I got there was Mike and I showed up. I never met Mike before, all right? So let's go back a little bit.
And maybe you should define what opportunism means in your business, because it has a specific meaning, right?
If you mean just taking advantage of the moment, in the moment when it happens, it's what I call jazz mentalism.
Oh, okay.
You just go with things as they happen. You see something, you save it for later on, or a piece of information. It might be as simple as, I'll give you a very basic thing, which I don't think I'm really exposing anything. Because I don't like to expose methods. I see no use for that, because here's the problem, right?
Fine.
People often say, why don't you teach the scientists the methods? And I have like 10 methods for bending a key. I teach you one method as a scientist. You now think you know how this is done, and somebody else comes along, does it a completely different way. You're going to think that that might be real. So I'm really setting you up for failure. You're much better off getting me or somebody like me to come in and take a look at the phenomena. We know what to look at. But I used to do walk-around mentalism, and that is like close up, like in a restaurant for people. Somebody might go, Mike, how did he do that? And I go, just said his name's Mike. I'd do one or two more tricks, and later on I'd say, no, I don't know you, right? Michael, how did he know my name? They forget that they had actually said the name.
That is opportunism.
That's opportunism.
Okay,
so taking something, saving it for later on.
This is a little bit different. Let's talk about this as teenage romp and opportunism,
Yeah,
I'd call it, because this is...
So Mike and I show up. I never met Mike, and we hit it off right away. I mean, we just knew that we were going to... I didn't know if I could trust him. He didn't know if he could trust me. We knew nothing about each other. I didn't know if he was going to be any good. He didn't know if I was going to be any good. I didn't have my driver's license with me for some reason. I think I came in with my passport or something like that. Mike had his driver's license, but Peter Phillips got a rental car, and for some reason we couldn't do the rental car. I know I couldn't take it because I didn't have my license, and I think Mike might have been underage for taking the rental car, but he had his license. So we had Peter Phillips, the physicist's car. And
he gave you his personal car?
He gave us his personal car while he took the rental car. All right, so we're following him.
Okay.
We're following him. Mike's driving. I look in the back seat and I see that there's a briefcase back there. I go, interesting.
Yeah.
So I bring it over, but I bring it kind of like under the dash so he can't see it in the rearview mirror if he happened to look back. And I notice the briefcase is locked. Now, if it's locked, that means there's a reason it's locked, that you don't want people to get in there. So it was a basic briefcase. So I pick the lock, open it up, and there's all this cutlery, all this silverware inside there. I'm going, either this guy's a kleptomaniac or this is for the experiments later on. So I start bending up all the silverware inside there. I close it. I put it in the back seat. I sit there for a little longer. I'm getting restless, like I always do. I open the glove compartment. I see some keys in there. I bend them up. A couple other pieces of metal. I bend them up. I close it. I start reaching over for the keys in ignition, and Mike says, I think you've done enough damage. But the reason I did this is because they talked about a thing called spontaneous PK. Spontaneous PK is if you're a psychic and you're sitting around and you have these abilities, sometimes things just happen around you. Like it just kind of pops out of it overflows and it causes these other things to happen.
You can't control your own.
You can't always
You're
control.
always vibrating the quantum level or whatever. And
whatever, yeah. And so that stuff convinces them later on when they find these things that, oh, something strange is going on and I want to catch this on camera. One of the things there was all the students were extremely skeptical. I mean, extremely skeptical. So what they did was they hid pieces of metal, like silverware, coins, and things and stuff like that underneath all the video equipment in places where you normally wouldn't look. And during one of the breaks, I happened to look and I noticed that there was a spoon underneath one of the pieces of the video, the VHR tapes. VHR tapes. I can speak today. And I go, what is that doing there? And then I started looking around. I noticed there's pieces of metal everywhere hidden. So when they weren't looking, I started bending all those up. And that actually convinced the students that maybe something unusual was happening as well. So it's sort of that opportunity, taking that opportunity wherever I could see it to make things happen. And sometimes those things wouldn't be discovered until weeks later, till like weeks after Mike and I had left.
And that is opportunism. Don't you have a story like you also just broke into the lab and started doing
Yeah, we
stuff?
did.
This is like, what were these controls?
I left,
or were you just so cherub-like that?
No, it's just they truly believed in this phenomenon. They wanted to document it and make sure that other people saw it. That was it. They didn't care whether it was real or not because they already believed that it was real. One time I left the window open, and Mike and I went across town till about 2, 3 in the morning, something like that. We came back. We crawled through the window of the Mac lab, and we came inside. We bent everything up in sight. I mean, everything. They had this coffee aquarium. What it was, it's an aquarium with these big bolts that went through, and they're bolted on the top of the aquarium, and there's a platform on the bottom, bolted on the bottom. There's coffee grounds on the bottom of the aquarium, and so it's an inverted aquarium, is what it is. On
so
top
the coffee
of it.
grounds are so they could tell if anybody's been.
Well,
what they
because
thought.
the spirits would often write out things.
Oh, I see. So it's a
in
platform.
the coffee grounds. Yeah, yeah. And
of course.
Yeah. So and there's a lock on this whole thing. There's a piece that goes over it with a lock on it and everything else. And Mike happened to look underneath and realized that the bolts for the holding the aquarium in were on the bottom. So all we had to do was undo those bolts, lift the whole thing up with the lock and everything else, and then write things in the grounds and then lock it back on again. So yeah. So anyway, so we destroyed the lab that day. Like just every piece of metal that could be bent and all that stuff that could be done.
Didn't you do too good a job? Weren't you afraid that you're going to come back and say everything's been done? They're going to know something's
No,
up?
because it's not like when you're there actually doing it yourself. Like one-on-one doing something with you, I've got to be, and I'll come back to that in a second. Remind me with the envelopes, and I'll give you a perfect example of where we wouldn't go. Yeah, just remember that in a second when I'm done with this story. Yeah. So I bent the place up. I'll try to remember too. So, and Mike did. And then we left and went home, went to bed. And Phillips calls in the morning about 8 o'clock. And he said, how'd you sleep? I said, I didn't sleep good at all. I dreamt that we were in the Mac lab, and like just all hell broke loose and all kinds of things happened. He says, well, get some more sleep. Come in just a little bit later. About an hour or two later, he calls me up. You did it. I went, what? And he goes, the Mac lab, like it's destroyed. Like everything is bent. Like your dreams destroyed the Mac lab. So he truly believed that our abilities had gone from the house all the way to the Mac lab itself and caused all these things.
Some kind of nightmare.
Yeah, it caused all this to happen. Either that or some other psychic power came in and caused these things to happen, and I had a dream about it. I don't know what he was thinking, but whatever it was one of those things that helped convince him. I mean, when we worked with them, we worked with other people as well. Mike Edwards, the other kid, worked with some other scientists. There was another guy by the name of Berthold Schwartz who lived out in New Jersey. Berthold kind of came on board.
He's one of the scientists?
I'll get to who and what he is in a second.
Well, when you say you worked with him, he wasn't a psychic friend of yours.
It wasn't a psychic friend.
Okay.
No.
Berthold Schwartz.
Berthold Schwartz was a psychologist, and he had heard about everything that I had done at the Mac lab. And he kept wanting me to come to New Jersey and work with him. And we were kind of towards the end of this whole thing, so I didn't want to get anybody else involved. You know, this was enough. But he kept pushing. So I went to New Jersey to go see him. And Berthold was an interesting character. He kind of believed in everything and anything. I'll give you an example. He wrote an entire book, which you can find online, a booklet for the Journal of Psychosomatic Dentistry and Medicine.
Dentistry.
Yeah, and it's like a 50-page booklet is what it is, and it's all about me. And he hooked me up to electrodes and did all kinds of psychological tests, and the psychological tests came out like if I wasn't psychic, I would be crazy, that kind of stuff. But because I was psychic, I wasn't crazy.
Yeah.
But like one of the things he did was he handed me a camera, and he said to me, look, I knew this lady who could take pictures of the sky, and you would see, when it was developed, the film was developed, you would see things you couldn't see with the naked eye. You'd see UFOs in the sky. Can you do this? I never said no to anything. Mike, on the other hand, was a little more conservative, but I would just say yes, and I'd try to figure a way to do it. And if I couldn't, so what? No harm, no foul. So I get the camera, I take pictures of the sky, film the footage of the sky. When he finally develops this footage, there's this weird kind of blob that starts to appear in the center. And you see Jesus Christ, you see a woman giving birth to a baby, a woman's nipple, torso, and thigh. You see all these different things. And when he shows it to me, I see them as well. And all that I had simply done is when he wasn't looking, I had spat on the front of the camera. And as it dried up, it created all these different faces and things that you could actually see. If you knew what to look for, you know, you saw, it's kind of like looking at the clouds, right?
Yeah,
Where
you
you see different shapes and stuff like that, and that's what that was. There was one time, he actually had this jar that he had, and it was sitting on the window, and on the shelf by the window. And I was supposed to concentrate it at 7 o'clock every night.
It's just a jar?
It's just a jar, but it's full of silverware.
Oh, okay.
And all kind of pieces of metal.
And he's in New Jersey?
He's in New Jersey, and I'm in Pennsylvania. And he would say, can you concentrate on this jar? The contents are, you know, spoons, forks, and things like that.
From Pennsylvania?
And it's all sealed, yeah.
Oh.
But do it at 7 o'clock every night, just as an experiment. He calls me up one day, and he says, you did it, you did it, you did it. And I go, well, what'd I do? He said, you know that jar you concentrate on every night? I go, oh, yeah, that jar. Yes, yeah, that jar. He says, you missed the jar, but you hit the radiator, and it's leaking all over the floor. So it was that kind of thing. He believed...
Wait. He got up in the morning, blurry-eyed. His radiator's leaking.
It was in the evening. The radiator was leaking. It started leaking around about 7 o'clock.
Started leaking, has to be psychic powers then.
Yeah.
He notices it's leaking around 7 o'clock.
And believes that
And he jumps from...
I missed the jar that's right above the radiator, and I hit the radiator instead.
He doesn't just think, wow.
No, because it is that sort of that secondary psychic things where things happen around that, right? If I bent a key...
I can see that if you're psychicking, or whatever you call it, from telekineting, whatever you call that, PKing from Pennsylvania, your aim might be off a little bit.
There was a lot of those things.
But to jump to... My radiator's leaking. What if his car? I mean, how far out was he going to take this for?
He took it all over the place. I mean, there would be a keychain that I bent a key on, and then later on somebody would go a few weeks later and go to their lock, and the tumbler would be messed up, and the rest of the key wouldn't work. I would be blamed for. I would absolutely be blamed for those things. He had he had like 100 little boxes, plexiglass boxes. And they were all sealed on a macro and micro level, by the way. A little hair and a much bigger piece of tape and stuff like that. And the bed that I would sleep in, he would lay them all around the room, even going under the bed, and hoping that some sort of spontaneous PK thing would happen. So one night I stayed up, and I went through quite a few of them, with the little hairs, little glue, everything else, and opened them up. And I did everything from making flash cubes burst, because there was this thing called magic cubes. And if you pushed a piece of metal up in it, you could get it to flash and blow. Did that. I would char pieces of paper that were inside there with a lighter. I would bend all kinds of different things, from protractors to anything that was metal would be bent. I took a couple of postcards and put them in my luggage that were inside, that had no stamps on. I'll get back to that too. Stamps, and then I sealed them all up, and I put those ones underneath the bed. The other ones laid all around the outside of the bed. Because he would come down in the morning before I was awake, and he would come and he would take a look at all of these things and look around, see if anything had happened. And he did it that morning, came down, looked around, nothing had happened. Went out to go get his daily newspaper, and in that time, because I knew he was gone always about 5 minutes, I took all the ones from out of the bed, put them on the outside, took the ones on the outside, put those underneath the bed, so that when he came back within that 5 minutes, he saw that all this phenomena had happened. When I was on the road, I put 2 stamps on the postcards, and they actually had addresses and everything on it, and they ended up getting to the location. He thought somehow that some spirits or psychic thing had happened to put stamps on the actual envelopes themselves. So it's a really interesting read, because
he is sucking the stuff up.
Oh yeah, but he presents it in such a scientific looking way. If you can find it, Steve Shaw telekinesis is called, Taming the Poltergeist. Look for the title, Taming the Poltergeist. Steve Shaw telekinesis, Taming the Poltergeist. Yeah.
Did you? In Project Alpha, you came out and they got tipped off. So that's the way that story ends.
Yeah,
Did you tip off Berthold as well?
Berthold got tipped off at the exact same time.
Okay.
And Berthold was the one that actually said in the end, look, these kids say that they were lying then. How do we know they're not lying now? How do we know they're not really
the old
psychic?
double lie.
And Randy hasn't paid him off to say that they're not psychic. He truly believed that.
So he went a step further then.
Yeah, he went a step further. I mean, at the very end of all this, when we came out and we said that everything was an illusion, the scientists at the Mac Lab didn't answer their phone for anybody, would not answer their phone until we spoke to them. And I have a phone call, and I still have it today. And I answer the phone. I called them. I called them back. They answered the phone. And, I said, yeah, what can I do for you? And they said, well, we heard this rumor, which isn't a rumor because it's a big press conference in the Time Life building in New York City. So it's all over. It's in every publication at this point. That you and Mike are working with the amazing Randy. And I said, well, what do you think about that? He says, it can't be true. And I go, well, unfortunately it is. And then it continued where Mark Schaefer was one of the other scientists that was working with Peter Phillips at the Mac Lab. He continuously says, well, what about this experiment? What about that experiment? Looking for one thing, just one thing that he could save face with. Now keep in mind, as we talked about being opportunists, sometimes I would just say things and do things because, hey, if I've got 5 things that I know are going to be really good information, that are going to hit, that are going to be real, I'm going to take a couple of guesses as well. And sometimes those guesses are going to hit. So I can't explain every single thing that I do.
But you're not going to say it's psychic.
No, it's definitely not psychic. It's just me taking a chance.
Okay,
yeah. What about all the things that didn't hit, right?
Yeah.
So going back to the envelope thing that I told you I would tell you about, one of the interesting things in the lab is I always said yes to everything. Mike didn't. I covered that a little bit earlier. But what would often happen is I would do something quite often, Mike would be doing it shortly afterwards. I mentioned the bell jar earlier with the rotor underneath it where I made it move to the left and move to the right. Mike's sitting next to me, and Mike says to me, hey, do you want to go down the hallway and go get a drink? That was our cue that he wanted to talk to me. If I wanted to talk to him, I'd say, let's go get a drink. And I said, no, because I know what he wants. He wants to know how I'm doing this. So he steps on my toe underneath the table, grinds his foot, and says, let's go get a drink. I'm thirsty. I went, all right, I'll go with you. I go down there. Mike looks at me and says, how the hell did you do that? I said, well, Mike, after all these hours of sitting here and concentrating, I finally just found out that I have real psychic powers. He says to me, he says, no, tell me. He says, tell me how you did it. So I told him, and he went back in the room, and next thing you know, he's making the rotor move to the left and move to the right. So I do this envelope test, the one where they stick one picture in and staple it shut inside the envelope, and then show me slides, and I sit in the room by myself, and I'm supposed to guess which picture it is.
Okay, so one of those slides is the picture.
One of those slides is the picture, and I gotta say it's picture 22 or picture number 3 or whatever it might be, and match it up. We were very careful of making sure that we didn't get every single one right. We just wanted to be above, quite decently above odds, but not so much that it looked like it might be a trick. So we had to get some wrong. Mike asks me how I do it. I say, well, Mike, when I'm in there, nobody's watching me. I said, it's just stapled. I just pull the staples out, and then I pull the picture out. I look, I see which one it is, put it back in. I push the staples back through and press them shut.
What are people doing in this room while you're doing this?
Nobody's in the room. They were in a different room. I'm sitting there.
No, they didn't set up a camera? They didn't?
No, I'm sitting.
They would not, they had no clue that, listen, these are kids. They're going to try to, I was about to say, not bad. They're going to try and mess with us here.
As far as they're concerned, we couldn't get in the envelope.
You were like honest little...
They were stapled shut. We couldn't get in. They didn't realize you could pull the staples out. So I do this, and I tell Mike. Mike goes in there. And there was a little detail I forgot to tell Mike, that I take the staples out and I put them in this ashtray that's sitting there to keep them all. So Mike's just putting them on the side of the chair, and he bumps them, and they all fall on the floor. So he tries to get them all, but he can't find like 2 of the staples. So now he's got an envelope that's missing 2 staples, right? So he comes back into the room, and he starts to tear it open, thinking quickly. He says, I think it's number 5, calling out a number that it's not.
But he starts to open
it. You don't want any heat on the envelope. When he goes back to them, they always open it. But in this one, he says, I think it's number 5, and it's definitely not number 5, because, again, you don't want the heat. So he starts to tear it open, past those 2 staples, of course. And they go, no, you can't open it. And then they opened it the rest of the way.
So he opened it to hide it.
He opened it to hide the fact that he had missed a staple.
And all he had to do was start.
Mike was a very quick thinker as well.
Improvisation.
We both were very quick thinkers when it came to situations, and we were able to play off each other. We knew how the other person thought. Yeah, in fact, we were studied by a BBC producer right towards the very end, where we were going to come out and say it was all an illusion. And he went to the amazing Randy. He said, Randy, what would convince you? He says, I believe in this stuff, but what would convince you? If I could get something on film, on TV, what would it take? Randy gave him the same caveats that he had given the Mac Lab. Well, he followed every single one of those caveats.
And you couldn't do anything.
We couldn't do anything, and it wasn't just me. It was and Mike. It was me, Mike, another kid by the name of Masawaki Kyoto. Now Masawaki Kyoto was a Japanese kid who actually could twist spoons. He had a way of twisting spoons, and what he had was a little thing in his foot. He'd put it in there and give it a twist, and it sort of became the holy grail for me to try to figure out how to do this without using a gimmick like that, without doing anything like that. And I found it in the end, and it's what most magicians do now.
So let me just clarify this. This person, his name again?
Masawaki Kyoto.
No, I'm sorry, the tester.
Oh, Tony Edwards. Tony Edwards, BBC producer, yeah.
He went to James Randi, and said, what are the controls, what are the protocols, and he followed them.
He followed them all the way through.
So I just want to make sure that's clear. He followed them.
Nothing happened, absolutely nothing happened that day until the cameras went off. The moment, and this is the thing that really scared Mike and I, we realized how powerful, you think metal baiting, okay, it's just a little, it's not going to affect anybody. It can be very, very powerful. The belief can be a very powerful and dangerous thing. Moment the cameras went off, Masawaki Kyoto takes a spoon under the table, nobody's seeing, puts a twist in it, and acts like he's twisting it. Tony Edwards sees the spoon twisting and just loses it, has a complete emotional and mental breakdown. Really, truly, it was scary to me and Mike. He starts screaming and yelling about how evil Randy is. He should never have listened to Randy. He would have got this on film if it wasn't for Randy. It's Randy's skepticism, Randy's fault that he didn't get it on there. The guy had lost it, completely lost it. I had to spend the evening with his assistant in her room because he was calling and scaring her. Like, I stayed in her room all night because he was calling her and she was scared to death of him. And this scared Mike and I to the point where we said, Randy, we need to come clean now and we need to do it now. And Randy says, look, it's only going to be 2 more months and the TV show is going to come out and we want to make it a big thing. We want to get as much publicity with it as we possibly can. So we held out for 2 more months. But it was at that point that Mike and I realized, you know, these, not just Tony Edwards, but I mean, it was scary because we didn't know how the scientists were going to be affected as well, because they had become our friends. When we first went in, it was us against the enemy, right? But over time, we broke bread with these people. We stayed in their homes. You know, we spent so much time with them. They were good people, good-hearted people. They basically were just in an area that were in over their heads. And it was, we didn't want to hurt them. That wasn't the reason we went in, to hurt people.
Well, this BBC producer, though, you know, he had a breakdown because Randy, I guess he could say Randy ruined his life's work. That was his one time that he could have caught it, and it was gone. He didn't connect it.
But it didn't ruin his way. Unlike Berthold Schwartz, who was a Freudian psychologist, you know, and hence the reason he saw all those images and so forth, and the images he saw. Unlike Peter Phillips, you know, who had tenure at Washington University, but still was a professor, it wasn't going to ruin Tony's life, right?
Okay.
These guys were so far into it already. Tony was basically doing a documentary, and you can go find it. It's called Bend, Bend, Bend. It actually came out.
Well, I guess it would have made him the most famous producer in the world.
It would have made him the most famous had he caught it, exactly. But he still went on to produce other shows down the line. It wasn't going to change anything for him.
He didn't realize the coincidence that it happened right after the camera shut off?
No, because to him it looked real. This stuff looks real to people.
All right, let me ask you, or I want to make a statement, and then maybe you can explain this back to me. Believe it or not, when I see you work, I mean, I want to believe in the trickery of it. So I know you're working on a trick or something. I don't know how it's done. I would never say that I know how this is done. You're an expert, you're a pro, you're brilliant at it.
Thank you.
I'm not going to pretend to go, oh, he's doing it with the ear, whatever people try to make up to say how you're doing it. So I know it's a trick, right? I'm watching you work. This 3-5 knife trick that you do that I've seen a couple of times, right? I know it's a trick.
It's a Russian roulette with knives, for people that don't know.
I hope I don't give anything away here because I don't know anything to give away, so if I stumble on it, just don't say anything. And I'm not going to try to give it away. I'm just saying that I know that you know what's going on. It's not, it's a trick.
Well, I even set it up that way. There's a point, so let's talk about what the trick is.
Yeah, set the trick up and then I'll explain how I feel about it.
I have, I bring a lady on stage. I show her 3 knives that are real daggers that are sharp.
And you show all of us that.
Yeah, and I used to use daggers that had no blade. The blade was sawn off. But then other people would say, well, they weighed differently. And it wouldn't make any difference because it's a prediction anyway, but they would say that and use that as an explanation. So what I now have is what we call locking blades. These are knives that have a handle and a blade, and if you press on the side really hard, you can close it, all right? These are placed in identical envelopes. 2 of them stay extended, but the envelopes are folded in half, so there's no way they can close, no way they can open secretly or anything like that. The lady watches everything as it all happens. And 3 of them are folded, right? So you've got 2 very, very dangerous knives and 3 that are folded, sealed in identical envelopes.
5 identical envelopes.
5 identical envelopes, all mixed up so nobody knows which is which, all right? Even if I knew which was which, wouldn't make any difference because it's a prediction. It's going to be predicted later. So these are laid out. 5 people come up on stage, and I set it up for anybody that's thinking that, hey, maybe I happen to know which one is which. All right, I set it up. Look, it's going to be my job to manipulate you, to get you to choose the envelopes I want you to choose. It's your job not to let me manipulate you in any way. I'm going to use everything at my means. And then I proceed to have them select knives. And then I talk to the audience and I show them how I was able to get them to choose particular knives. How I was able to touch the guy on the breast and I pointed a knife and he took it. How the second lady, because I said that I pointed a knife with the first guy, she's not going to choose one I pointed at. So I pointed at these 2, only leaving this one envelope for her.
Though, you actually go,
I actually go straight
please
down.
choose one of these knives.
And
you say one of these, now you point right to one and
right
he takes that one.
He takes that one. And so when the next lady comes, I know that she's not going to choose, you know, the knives I point at. So I point at 2, just like that, straight on top of the 2, and I've manhandled the other one. So I've got all these little things. Now, as to whether that psychology is real or not, I'm not going to say.
Okay,
I'm just saying it's all play. You know, there's a lot of play, back and forth things. There's a point where I try to make a lady feel uncomfortable so that she doesn't remember which knife she selected or she stays with her selection. In the end, there's an envelope that's been sitting there the whole time. Somebody else takes the envelope, takes out a piece of paper, reads off, and it might say, 1, 4, and 5 will select safe knives. You know, 2 and 3 will have dangerous knives. I say 2 and 3 go to the other side. I lay down on a table. 2 of those people stab me in the gut. The last knife I hold up and I bring my hand down. After I've actually shown one of those is a dangerous knife by stabbing it into a block of wood, and then finally I stab the last one into the block of wood as well. So I predicted which would be the safe knives, which would be the dangerous knives. And it's a very, I know it makes audiences feel uncomfortable.
Well, before you go too far, people, the knives, they come over and they literally, it's a good thrust.
Yeah,
and the point is, if there were a knife in there,
I tell them don't come down slow because I don't want it to rip and tear. I want it to come down solid.
Okay, so before you go on to how uncomfortable this is, let me tell you something that I don't want to offend you at all, but I don't believe for a second that you don't know what's going on.
Right.
Okay. So I know that. I know that you know exactly what's going on. It's safe. You're going to be fine. I'm still freaking scared and looked away.
Yeah.
Even though I'm like, he's the pro. He knows what this is a trick he's doing.
Let me put it this way, right?
What's going on with me where I had to look away?
Let me put it this way first of all before we even get to that. I was the first one ever to do a Russian roulette with knives. The very, very first one to do a Russian roulette with knives. Since that time, there's been a lot of people that have emulated me. And if you go to YouTube, Vimeo, you put in knife roulette, you're going to see people, it's very uncomfortable. You're going to see people that have taken their hand and they brought it down upon a knife, a piece of glass, or a nail, and it's gone right through their hand. So even though they thought they knew what was going on, you can still fail. There's always that X factor. Yeah, I know what's going on, but my job becomes getting people right, as I say in the thing, to get them to choose the knives I want them to choose. Or is there something else going on? I'm not going to tell you. I always tell people I use verbal, nonverbal communication, magic, psychology to create my effects. And people say, well, what was that? When you bent the metal or when you tapped the person, the other person felt it, what was that? I say, I'm not going to tell you which one it was. It might be one of those things, or it might be a combination of those things. I do want to keep the mystery there as well. So what's going on with that other is I think people... There is this instinctive thing of people thinking, well, he could possibly fail. People fail at these things all the time. Anything that you do has an X factor. I've had moments in that routine where I have messed up, and it's happened quite a few times. But I also have ways of being able to fix those things because of what I do. It's sort of what I call jazz mentalism. It's opportunist. It's taking that opportunity and making it work for me. Exactly like when I work with the scientists and they said, can you do this? I had no clue how I was going to do it, but on the spot I would figure out a method, a way to make it work. And I'm always going to do that, try to until I die. And whether it's on stage doing the knife roulette, that could be it. You never know.
It's a scary trick.
Yeah, well, I take that as a
From my point of
I
view.
take it as a compliment. Some magicians hate that trick. They say you are making people, putting them in an uncomfortable position. To me,
That's the thrill.
To me, that's part of the emotion, right? I want good things. I want unhappy, dangerous things like that are going to scare you. If you walk out of that theater, you're going to remember that. You're going to talk about that. That's what I want you to be doing.
All right. Banachek, the cream of the crop, has been my guest today on 502 Conversations. Is it Banachek.com? People can find you. You have a show schedule. You have anything you want to say about that?
We have a podcast, which you can get on iTunes as well.
Now,
yeah, which is Banachek's Brain. You can find me, just do research under Banachek. Any social media, I will come up.
All right.
Banachek, 1C.
Banachek. Banachek.com has been my guest on 502 Conversations. I'm Brian Kirby. If you'd like to get in touch with me, you can reach me at 502conversations@gmail.com. This has been great.
Thank you
very much. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome.